Hey, welcome back to Ask Matt, where you ask questions and I answer them to the best of my ability, sometimes awkwardly, but doing my very best. Today, we're going to actually talk about a question that involves me doing my very best because I had two people. One who actually was the requester of the last one, Karsten Jaksch, and also a second one, a long-time internet friend of mine, Jonas Erlandson. They both asked great questions around ADHD. So Karsten's question, he said, I would like to hear about your journey and what you do to stay somewhat productive while having ADHD. And Jonas said, I'd like to be able to hear how you deal with productivity, motivation, and procrastination while having ADHD. So both of these have to do with, as a person with ADHD, how do I get stuff done? I've written a 500 plus page book. I own a company. I write blog posts. I make videos. How to get these things done? The first thing I can tell you before we actually get into any of the specific points is this video was supposed to come out a week ago. So that's how I do it, imperfectly, because I'm human. Okay, moving on. I've got a list of things that I want to talk about, the specific ways that I feel are helpful, or pieces that are of my life that are helpful to me as a person with ADHD to actually get things done. So let's start with number one, grace. Grace is for myself primarily. The grace is understanding that I'm not a perfectly productive person. Nobody's a perfectly productive person, whether or not they have ADHD. And my merit and my worth aren't judged based on my ability to get 40 productive hours in or knock out a certain amount of tasks. I am a good and wonderful person as I am. And especially as a person who's neurodivergent, if you're familiar with that phrase, what it means is I'm living in a world that's not built for how my brain works. I'm living in a world that is built for people whose brains have executive function, right? And mine has messed up executive function. They can focus. They don't have rejection sensitivity, dysphoria, all these kind of things. And I have those things. And so my brain works outside of the normal. So I just have grace for myself and say, I'm going to do the best I'm capable of doing, living in this world, being productive in this world, knowing that there are things stacked up against me. And of course, there's things stacked up against other people that I don't have stacked up against me, right? I've got privileges as well. But in this particular moment, I'm not worried about other people. I'm worried about me. So I give myself grace. First thing to do is just say, I'm not going to do it perfectly. I'm not going to get it all right. I'm not going to match up to somebody else. And that's okay. The second thing that I do to help me with my ADHD is have a sense of humor. I've found that understanding the problems as something that's not wrong with me, but just something that happens to people, and it's something that is just the way my brain is physically built, allows me to look at it less as a personal failing when I have trouble with things, or something that I'm worried about annoying people, and now just say, that's how my brain is. And I used to worry about a lot of the aspects of my ADHD that people would be just irritated by them, or they would think that I was weird or whatever. And now I'm like, yeah, I'm the fast talking guy, right? I'm always fidgeting with my fingers. I leave voice memos on my phone 100 times a day, to the point where eventually anybody who's around me long enough starts mocking me for leaving the little voice memos, because it's just a thing I do. But they're not mocking me in a harsh way. It's just kind of like, yep, there's Matt, hey, I can't say her name or she'd actually listen to. Hey, Fury, remind me to blah, 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 blah. It's just a thing. We just laugh about it and we move on. Or when I forget things, I used to beat myself up all the time. I forgot to do this and I'm such a terrible person, whatever. And I just say, yep, well, there's my bad memory. Or if it's a thing that's very important, I say, there's my bad memory, but I know this is an important thing. Here's what I'm going to do in response. So I guess that's a little bit more grace than a sense of humor. The next thing I do to help keep productive with my ADHD is find my right fit. When I first got out of school, I went to work for a nonprofit that was a really, really bad fit for me as a person. And it made it very difficult for me to work. It made it difficult for me to just live, because I was unhappy every single day, feeling like I wasn't well matched with the tasks assigned to me. I didn't know how to do them well. There's a lot of things where I had to try and do a thing to try and bring people in. And if I didn't bring enough people in, then I felt rejected, because, ADHD brings along with it rejection. I think it's rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And there's just a lot of things that made me very uncomfortable, a lot of things that triggered discomfort, a lot of things that put me in bad spaces for my ADHD. But what I would find is that when I did programming on the side, I didn't have that problem at all. I just had a ton of fun. I could just lock in. I could focus on it. I could keep organized. And now I work as a programmer, and it turns out that it's a fantastic fit for me. And that doesn't mean I still don't run into these problems, but finding a place where I am fit. And I don't want to say just as a programmer, because I'm also a business owner. And what you find is a lot of people with ADHD find themselves in places where they run the thing. It's often, especially if it's a creative space, in part because we're able to do something I'll talk about next, which is delegation. But we're able to set things up where we find the place where we fit the best. And we're not letting somebody else tell us what to do. We're saying, no, I need to figure out what works best for me. And then I put myself in that space, and then we work around it. So finding your right fit, finding your right physical location or your right job or your right career or whatever is can be very helpful. So let's move on to the next one, which I already mentioned, which was delegation. One of the benefits of running a company is that I don't have to do any individual thing. I find the things that I'm good at, the things that I'm uniquely good at, often because of my ADHD, I do those things, and I find other people who are uniquely good at things that I'm uniquely terrible at. And I've always had somebody, well, not always, but almost since the beginning of the company, there's been somebody at the company who's very structured, very organized, very good at remembering things, and that's just not me. So I'm glad to have those people and have them around me helping me get my stuff together, because I don't have my stuff together and they can do it. Meanwhile, I can go do creative things that maybe they're not capable of doing. So delegation, understanding what things I can do and what things I'm responsible for, but I can get somebody else to do, applies at work, but it can also apply in my personal life. There are some things that I'm perfectly capable of doing, but I'm gonna forget, and it's worth delegating to a paid service or to an online tool or whatever else, so that I'm not constantly frustrated with myself for my inability to do that thing. All right, my next one, and this is in no particular order as you can tell, is medicine. I take Vyvanse. I tried Adderall and long-release Adderall, and they didn't work as well for me, so I like Vyvanse. It was a little bit softer and more gentle to me. Not everybody goes for medicine. I didn't at the beginning. I wanted to try and figure it out without medicine, and I'm glad I did. I'm also glad I'm on medicine right now. The medicine makes it much more likely that I'm going to be able to focus and pay attention to what I'm working on. And you can tell towards the end of the day that I'm getting a little bit more ADHD. That's also fine. And some days I choose not to take the medicine. Also fine. But it's a tool that is in my arsenal. I'm grateful for it. The next one is therapy and coaching. So I know that there are people who set out specifically to be ADHD coaches, and I bet they'd be a really good fit. I happened to be going to a therapist when I was diagnosed who was also an ADHD specialist. So my therapist was the one who helped me with ADHD. My current therapist studied and did all sorts of work for people with executive function disorders when she was younger. And so she's also been helping with that as well. But having a person to talk to who is a medical expert who understands, or maybe not a medical expert, but a psychological expert of some sort, who understands ADHD and understands the shortcomings, can not only help you do better, but from a therapy perspective, it can help me realize all the ways that I've been made to feel lazy, like I'm a bad person, I don't care enough or whatever, from things that had nothing to do with me caring or not caring, being motivated or not motivating. They just had to do with the way ADHD makes me interact with the world around me, the tasks I should be doing, the things I even intend to do. I mean, one very common outcry for people with ADHD is, I want to do it, and yet I can't make myself do it. Right? And that doesn't mean that that's an excuse. I mean, we still need to work around it. But if you felt that way your whole life, you just feel like you're a terrible person. So thank God for ADHD coaches and for therapists who help us do better, but also feel better about ourselves, understanding this is not a reflection of us as lazy or whatever else. The next thing I use for my ADHD productivity is lists. If you have ADHD, you're probably very familiar with the idea of lists, especially the fact that we all make a million lists, and then half the time we don't actually take care of all the lists because we've dumped all the stuff in the lists and now they feel overwhelming. The big trick for me is I like a physical list. I like a list that is not too long or else it's overwhelming. And I like to give myself grace to recognize that sometimes a list is going to stagnate and I got to come back to it later and just start again. So I've got a list here right now where I was doing something that's sort of like a bullet journal. I have a bullet journal, love my bullet journal, but sometimes it just doesn't click. Sometimes I go for weeks without using it and then I go back in and I use it for 3 months. No idea why. And for a little while here, I was printing out a list every day and for some reason the act of printing it helped. Okay. But this one right here is from 6 days ago, and I just fell off, and I will get back on it. And so this is the grace again. Making lists, understanding when lists are less helpful. Is it because they get too long? Is it because they're digital versus paper? Is it because when you, like me, when your life gets so overwhelming, you can't even look at the list in the morning because you just got to handle all the things that are coming away? Whatever it is, maybe build things around that. Maybe also just give yourself grace and don't allow that list to be something that stresses you out. I mean, if you've never consumed any of the media around the concept of getting things done, there's a book, but there's also all sorts of YouTube talks and everything else as well. His general idea there is ideas are roaming around in our brain and it takes up brain space, and what we need to do is get them out. And sometimes for me, getting the idea out of my brain helps my brain function better, even if I don't do the thing, or if I don't do the thing for 6 days or 6 months or whatever, just getting it out of my brain is helpful. So lists, make lists, use lists, make lists. The next thing I do is crazy calendaring and Pomodoros. So if you take a look at my calendar, what you will see is every day is almost fully blocked up. And if there's any spots that are not fully blocked up, that day I get to say, ooh, those are moments I get to work on things off of my list. But most of the time, all the things I'm going to do are completely blocked off way ahead of time. Whether the things that I put on as a block or whether they are meetings with people or whatever else, my calendar is usually full from the beginning to the day to the end of the day. And that's helpful for me because now I know what to do and I'm never left wondering, oh no, what am I supposed to do? Or I'm not just sitting there only responding to the things that are coming up in the moment. Hopefully I've also put times in those calendar items to say, work on this important thing. So if I got something that's due at the end of the week, I'm going to go and put blocks of 1 hour, 30 minutes or whatever else throughout the week and say, work on this thing until it's done. And you know what? If I put too many blocks in, then that's a time nobody could put a meeting for me. And now I get to pick the next most important thing on my list and work on it during that time anyway. So putting stuff in calendars, and that lines up with the concept of Pomodoros as well. If you're not familiar, a Pomodoro is sometimes something where you basically set a timer. Historically, the joke or the image around a Pomodoro has been a little tomato kitchen timer. But I know people are talking about Pomodoros again on the internet in the last couple months. I don't know how they're talking about it, but I know that historically you basically just say set a 50-minute timer and then take a 10-minute break and set a 50-minute timer and take a 10-minute break. And usually during those 50 minutes, and it could be 20 minutes, whatever your thing is, you work on one thing. So my calendars are sort of like little Pomodoros, right? I say from 10 to 10:50, I'm going to work on this one thing. And then from 10:50 to 11, I'm going to use the restroom, grab a snack, make a coffee, maybe respond to a couple emails, and then move into my next thing. So Pomodoros and this calendaring idea are thinking ahead of time how you're going to use your time so you don't look back on the last 3 hours and say, what did I actually do? What actually happened? Did I do my more important things, my less important things? I'm not actually sure. Putting some structure in your day and making some plans around how those things are done. And also time scoping them, I guess. Saying, I'm not going to work on this overwhelming thing for 8 hours. I'm going to work on this thing for 50 minutes and then take a break. There's so many different angles in which this can help you. There's so many different ways where it can help you feel less overwhelmed, help you feel more focused, help you feel like you know what to do, right? Like you're not stuck. So yeah, anything that has to do with really kind of structuring and segmenting my day into pieces, whether it's through a calendar or Pomodoros or both, is very helpful for me. And there's probably a lot more things that I do, but when I sat down to think of this is the list I came up with, and the last one is good people. I mentioned this with the grace a little bit before. I also mentioned it with the therapy, but I've been around a lot of people in my life who've made me feel like I'm lazy, like I'm uncaring, like I'm bad because of the things that were symptoms of my ADHD. And it wasn't always necessarily their fault. Sometimes it was. Sometimes they were just ignorant. Often I was ignorant when they were ignorant too, right? But what I've found is having gracious people around me, not just giving myself grace, but looking for people who offer others grace, especially if they're educated about things like this. But even if they're not educated, for them to not instantly assume that this person's acting differently, therefore they're bad, but to say, let me figure out why this person is behaving this way. And then those people understand it. And then they're gracious and understanding is incredible. So if you have people around you who are making you feel terrible, sure, try to educate them, but also just look for people who are gracious and understanding and loving to people who are having a difficult time. That doesn't mean that people who are around those of us with ADHD have to put up with everything we give them, right? Like we need to be gracious and caring for them. If you are in a relationship, a romantic relationship, and you have ADHD, you might want to go read one of the fantastic books about being in relationship with a person with ADHD or being a person with ADHD in a relationship. There's so many books. I don't want to recommend a bunch of books right now because if you're like me, books are a little overwhelming. But in general, certainly go find the resources to figure out how to be a loving partner, spouse, parent, child, whatever with ADHD. But I have found that having gracious people around me who can have a sense of humor with me, who can give me grace, all these things that I've been talking about that I want to give to myself, when I have people around me who give those things to me, I find it's incredibly more valuable than anything else I can do because I feel like together we can solve anything, if that makes sense. So this last one isn't exactly a tip, but in Jonas's question, he specifically said, I'm extremely motivation driven in my ADHD and it both saves and heavily ruins me. So he's talking about motivation and procrastination. And I don't exactly have a tip that's connected to those. But one thing I would note is that working with your natural motivation styles and working with your procrastination and just understanding that they're there is as valuable as finding tools to address those things. So yeah, we can do certain things to help motivate ourselves to do things like if I get 50 minutes of this done and then I'm going to allow myself that snack instead of getting the snack ahead of time, or things to discourage us from procrastinating or whatever they are. And I think that those things are all very helpful and valuable, but the things that have helped me the most is just learning to work with the way my brain works. And so this isn't procrastination or motivation, but for example, one of the things that I do is this ADHD cleaning. I scatter clean. I clean that, and then I'm walking by that, and I start cleaning that, and I walk by that and start cleaning that, and I used to feel terrible about it. And now I'm just like, that's just how I clean. That's just an ADHD thing, And so I think with motivation and procrastination, I try as much as possible to also just work with the things I have. I just work with the fact that I'm not necessarily motivated to work on certain things, and I'm super motivated to work on others. So the ones that I'm motivated to work on, I'm more likely to spend 8 hours and get hyper focused and sit down and work on. And I don't really need to worry about scheduling those. Whereas the things that I have a harder time deciding to do and making an intentionality to do, those are the ones I need to put scheduled items in or whatever. So it's not that it's bad that I'm motivated by some things or others, but it means that I have to address tasks based on their level of motivation, excitement, or procrastination. I would say that that's a very stereotypical ADHD thing, is to say, I procrastinated this thing, for 3 months and it only took me 5 minutes, right? And so I would say that if there's any tools that you can find that help you just sit and get the thing done no matter what, the more times you're able to do that, the more times you're going to look at those things that used to seem so terrifying and say, hold on, last time I did something that was so terrifying to me, it only took me 5 minutes. Why don't I set a 5-minute timer and just work on this thing? So use some of those other tools, use some of the Pomodoro, a little bit of cognitive restructuring about how your brain's even thinking about the problem. But in the end, I would just say, your brain works the way it does, right? It is motivated by certain types of things and not by others. It is more likely to procrastinate on certain things and not on others. How can you work with it to make a productive lifestyle versus stop it, versus fix it or anything like that? And I know that's not a very specific answer, but I still hope that's helpful, because that's kind of what it works like for me. Is the best trick is in each moment to recognize that this is the way my brain works. How can I work with it to get the outcome I want? So there's probably a bunch of other things. I mean, I've read quite a few books about ADHD and watched tons of YouTube videos and stuff like that, but I have ADHD, so it's all just kind of bouncing around my head, and this is the best I've got right now. But if you have ADHD and you have any tactics that you really like, I would really appreciate it if you left them in the comments, both for me and for anybody else who came along. So thank you so much to Karsten and Jonas for asking the question today. And remember, if you have any questions for me, leave them in the comments below, or hit me up on Twitter @StauferMatt. And leave me your next questions. I'm pretty sure my next video after this is actually going to be a non-Ask Matt video. Probably going to be bouncing it back and forth between Ask Matt and something technical, but there will certainly be a lot more coming soon. So thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time.